early or so, maybe 8 minutes early. Am I missing anybody that's hiding? Okay. Well, it looks like most are here, so I thought I'd go ahead. I just wanted to get up here and look at my notes a little bit, and of course, once I started using the mic, then the sheep all came into the pen. And well, I hope you had a good lunch. This whole page, I understand that this is a complicated part of the history because you have similar names and you have a lot of stuff coming together, but the purpose of this sheet, whether it makes sense now, as you look back at it, hopefully helps you set things in the correct line. There's probably three reasons at least I put this together hoping to be helpful. Color coding to try to keep the lines straight. One was to show the horrific impact of alliances. Here, Omri with Ethbaal, Ahab marrying Jezebel, nasty impact on the northern kingdom. Jehoshaphat, an otherwise good king, the alliances he had with the northern kingdom across the board. That First Chronicles, that passage I read, that God rebuked him for loving those who hate Yahweh, gave his son in marriage to the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, Athaliah, which brought Baalism and corruption down to the southern kingdom. So we can see the impact of Baalism on both the northern and the southern kingdom. We can see Jehu's impact, who we'll talk about a little bit later, some more about, who is carrying out God's verdict against the line of Ahab, and is also going to do other things that God asked him to do, but not all. And then it just kind of helps us see these three major areas and lines, how they intersect. You also have these names, Jehoram, Ahaziah, Jehoram, and it tries to help you see these are not the same guys. You have to understand who's talking, who's being talked about to get those names straight. So it's kind of anyway. Questions about that? Does anybody have an idea what it's about? Okay. You may not have it mastered, but hopefully it's helpful. We're going to come back then to about page 55 in your notes. 7a, Judah, Athaliah, Joash, Amaziah, Uzziah. So I skipped over the rest of Joram because we kind of talked through what happened, where he had been in a battle against the Syrians, lost the battle, wounded, came back to Jezreel to recover, and his general Jehu is going to come and finish him off, and then mortally wound Ahaziah. And so we have a major transition in the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And so the one in the southern kingdom starts with that lovely paragon of compassion and kindness, his grandma, Athaliah. Not really. She's an evil. When I have 20 kings in the southern kingdom in my list, it's really 19 kings, 1 queen. She's not of the Messianic line, but she's one of the 20 rulers in the southern kingdom. She was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, wife of Jehoram, mother of Ahaziah, now dead, and she tries to wipe out all her grandchildren so she can have the throne. And in the notes I say here that Joash is the one recovered or hidden by the high priest's wife, Jehoshaphat. The high priest's name was Jehoiada. So I say here that under 1b, Athaliah, during her reign, Athaliah promoted Baal worship. Matan was the official high priest of Baal. After a 6-year reign, both were executed. So when we talk about Jehoshaphat giving his son Jehoram in marriage to Athaliah, the consequences were far-reaching. The connections he's making have far-reaching consequences. And both on his family and on the nation. Then thinking about Joash then, he's that one grandson who survived. shielded by Jehoiada and Jehoshaphat, who were his aunt and uncle. I say here in 2b, after being spared from Athaliah's purge and hidden for several years by his aunt Jehoshaphat, he was crowned king at the age of 7. In his reign as king, he began well but ended badly. When he was under the guardianship of his uncle, Jehoiada, the high priest, he did well. It says he got rid of, when that happens, when they bring him out, he's a little baby, less than 1, when the purge happens. Jehoiada and Jehoshaphat keep him and guard his safety, and then when he's 7, here's the real king, and they take Athaliah and Matan and put them to death, and Jehoash is put on the throne, but he's 7 years old. And so Jehoiada is kind of his guide in this process, and they wipe out the utensils of false worship. They restore the worship at the temple. The temple's repaired. But again, out in the larger land of the southern kingdom, there still are those high places, those places of the worship of false gods. By the way, just so you know, when you read historical books, a high place is not intrinsically bad. It's a place where worship took place. Now, when you think of Solomon, when you look at Solomon's reign, in the beginning of his reign, when he hadn't gone down over the cliff, it says he offered sacrifices to the Lord at a high place. And it means a place where worship would have taken place that was visible for people to see. It's as time goes on, later on in the monarchy period, high places become associated with wicked worship. And so it's more by context you know it. So early on in Solomon's reign, a high place is an innocent term to describe a prominent place where worship took place, like in Solomon's time, before the tabernacle or the temple is built, and the tabernacle hasn't been all brought back together yet. The Ark of the Covenant is in Jerusalem, but all the pieces aren't there. So high place is, in this case here, not all the high places were destroyed. It's talking about not all the places of worshiping other gods were destroyed. So when Jehoiada's uncle was kind of guiding his steps, he did well. Unfortunately, after Jehoiada died, as an old man, 130 years, Joash went downhill. Became an idolater, at least a syncretist, worshiping Yahweh plus other gods, even killing the prophet Zechariah, not the one who wrote the second to last book of the Old Testament, but Zechariah. And you know what the sad thing is? Here's the sad thing. So we have Joash is the son of Ahaziah, the grandson of Athaliah and Joram, sheltered by Jehoiada. Jehoiada's son is Zechariah the prophet. After Jehoiada dies, Ahaziah is already gone, and Joash is going off the cliff. He's beginning to migrate towards syncretism, the worship of other gods plus Yahweh. Zechariah says, don't. Joash kills his cousin, the son of the guy who spared his life. I mean, this is treachery for kindness that happens there. So just that kind of chaotic impact of covenant treachery. So he rules in his own right, he doesn't do well, and then he goes downhill. What's going to happen here is we're going to have Judah get smaller and smaller and smaller. They're invaded by the Syrians, by the Arameans up in the north, and eventually they're able to plunder the city. Joash is wounded, not the most popular guy, because the temple servants took the opportunity of this confusion to kill him. So Joash is done. Began well, ended badly. His son Amaziah was a kind of a good king. We aren't told a ton about him, but he does have conflict with the northern kingdom. Uzziah, just talk about for a bit, he was a generally good king. He ended badly, but a generally good king. Uzziah, page about 56. He's also called Azariah in 1 Chronicles, same guy. So his dad is Amaziah. He's going to be co-regent with his father, and then he's going to have his son be his co-regent as well. And when he came to the throne, Judah was a nub, a small bit of what it used to be. When you think about divided monarchy, turn it on. There we go. You have Jerusalem here, the divided monarchy. Judah is all of this. But under, both in the north and the south, shrunk because they were under the dominance of other peoples. And Syria was huge. Syria up in the north. You have up in the north around Samaria is the capital. It just is not much around, but around it is still independent. Jerusalem, just a little bit around Jerusalem, is independent when Uzziah comes to the throne. So it's a bad time for both Judah and the northern kingdom. But that changes in both 2 Kings 15 and 2 Chronicles 26. Let me just read 2 Kings 15. So we have 2 Kings 15, 16 years old when he became king, because his dad, Amaziah, had been put in prison. And it says, Azariah did what was right in the Lord's sight, just as his father Amaziah had done. And then verse 4, yet the high places were not taken away. The people continued sacrificing and burning incense on the high places. So he did a good job in ways, but didn't wipe out all the high places. I think Chronicles even says something more important. 2 Chronicles 26. Let me turn there. So we have in 2 Chronicles 26, Uzziah made king, and it says when he was 16 years old, he became king and reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. Verse 4, he did what was right in the Lord's sight, as his father Amaziah had done. He sought the Lord throughout the lifetime of Zechariah, the teacher of the fear of God. During the time he sought the Lord, God gave him success. And then the next verses talk about, like verse 8, his fame spread as far as the entrance of Egypt, for God made him very powerful, fortifies Jerusalem, builds this and that, has military victories. But verse 16, but when he became strong, he grew arrogant, and it led to his own destruction. And then it goes and it details all the sad events that occurred toward the end of his reign. And then the epitome of arrogance, it says he acted unfaithfully against the Lord his God by going into the Lord's sanctuary to burn incense on the incense altar. Azariah, the priest, along with 80 brave priests of the Lord, went in after him. Don't! They took their stand against King Uzziah and said, Uzziah, you have no right to offer incense to the Lord. Only the consecrated priests, the descendants of Aaron, have the right to offer incense. Leave the sanctuary, for you have acted unfaithfully. You will not receive honor from the Lord God. But he does it. And it says, in the presence of the priest in the Lord's temple, beside the altar of incense, a skin disease broke out in his forehead. They suggest leprosy of some kind, and he's diseased until the time of his death, quarantined in a kind of a small residence, and his son is going to have to rule as a co-regent because of Uzziah's arrogance. Jotham will have to take over. This is one of those cases of just a sad thing. Uzziah, good king, honors the Lord, pursues him, tries to do what's right. God gives him great victory. And then when he, after his great success, he became arrogant and then became unfaithful to God. I just would encourage you to always remember where you fit in light of who God is. It's on the one hand, I think it's good to be thankful to God for the strengths and weaknesses he gives us and the abilities we have. And I don't mean to diminish or say none of us have strengths. But I pray pretty regularly in my own life. I thank the Lord that he makes use of cracked clay vessels, because it's and I'm not reveling in my sin or my imperfections. I'm trying to celebrate his mercy and his grace, because it's using an imperfect vessel for his glory in some small way in the kingdom cause. And so I want to remind myself that it's I'm a pipe, a fairly humble, average pipe through which the conduit of God's activity takes place. And it's not me that deserves any credit or glory. It's a great God who works through a cracked clay vessel. And then the things we see in the Bible, pride goeth before destruction. Uzziah, after his great success, became arrogant and then became unfaithful. That's emblazoned all over the pages of human history. Men and women who have drank that poison, if you will, and had the mistaken notion that it's all about them. I just would encourage you to, if you keep your eyes on God, that's one of the benefits of that theocentric focus that we don't have enough of. If you keep your eyes on God and his greatness and his majesty and his awesomeness, you realize what you aren't, and that without him you are really nothing. And so it helps to remind you that he deserves the glory and we don't. And Uzziah is one of those examples that always convicts me that when we get our eyes off of God and on ourselves and what allegedly we might have done, we go downhill fast. Anyway, so he dies eventually. Spends 10 years segregated in a small little residence because of his arrogance and entering the precinct of the priests, the temple. And but having said that, I do want to point out, before his fall, in this appendix, not 38, the next one, on 40. Remember, I said when he came to power, Judah was kind of the small area around Jerusalem, and Israel was the small area around Samaria that wasn't under the thumb of the Arameans. By the time Uzziah reaches the pinnacle of his reign, and a guy we're going to see in a moment called Jeroboam II, Israel becomes massive in comparison to what they were. This is like the golden age of the divided monarchy. This is their pinnacle of extension of power and prosperity and land allotment available to them under Uzziah, southern kingdom we just talked about, and then the next section, 8a, the dynasty of Jehu. We're going to talk about Jeroboam II in just a moment. These two guys kind of make Israel to the north, Judah to the south, have its greatest expanse since the time of David and Solomon. But it ends badly for Uzziah because of his pride, and then we'll look at Jeroboam. So 8a, around page 56, the dynasty of Jehu, number 4. Are you there? On your notes? Good, thank you. Either the nod head or the yes helps me know you are there. All right, so you have the timeline there, and again, I know this is a lot of information, but I'm trying to help you be able to see who corresponds to who around the same time. Jehu had a long reign. We're going to start back. Remember, I take our camcorder. We just went from Athaliah over to Uzziah, and now we're going to go back north and go back to Jehu, who kind of started all of that, and move along for the northern kingdom. And the dynasty of Jehu is the longest one in the northern kingdom's history, 90 years. Jehu and his family rule. Jehu, though, 1b, was an evil king. He was, that captain, that general of Joram's army when they have this battle against the Syrians, which they lose. Elisha the prophet comes to Jehu and says, you're going to be the next king of Israel, and I've given you some jobs. 1, exterminate the dynasty of Ahab. 2, purge the land of Baal worship. And so he did both of those well. A third responsibility God gave him, I don't have specified here, but God had said, and worship me and conduct your reign like David in his best situation did, and you'll have a long tenure. And he does just that. Remember I talked about in that super confusing page, I hope I'm teasing, he ends up killing the son of Ahab and Jezebel that survived as king, and then throughout the northern kingdom gathers up the remaining descendants of Ahab and kills them all. They're an offense, and this is fulfillment of prophecy. Now, I didn't look at this at length, but you have to skip some things to get done. In Ahab and Jezebel's time, they built a summer palace in Jezreel at the edge of the valley of Megiddo, the Jezreel Valley. And you remember there was a guy at Jezreel who owned a vineyard. His name was Naboth, N-A-B-O-T-H. And Ahab asks, hey, I want to buy your vineyard because it's near the palace. I want to plant a garden there. And Naboth, as a good Israelite, said, no. Why would he say no to the king? Land was allotted by the Lord. It wasn't just up for grabs. It wasn't like he was going to have a bidding contest to see if he could get the most money possible. It was a non-negotiable. Land was a divine stewardship given to Israelites that was supposed to stay in the family because that was to give them a platform on which to conduct their lives in a way that would point attention to God's greatness and glory. Well, you remember what happened. Ahab goes back to his room and the big old lower lip sticks out. Yeah, whatever. They call that the poochy lip disease in America. But Jezebel sees that Ahab is down in the dumps. He's unhappy. He's feeling sorry for himself. And he tells her why. And she says, hey, I'll take care of this. She was a doer. And so she comes up with 2 liars who testified that Naboth had done something reprehensible, bring him before the town elders as if he's going to be rewarded, and drop this in his lap, and they take him out and stone him. And Ahab is happy. Woohoo, I got my land. And as he goes to his land to celebrate, Elisha comes out. You are in trouble. God's going to judge you, Ahab, for your treachery. There's a somewhat of a repentant spirit, and the Lord says, okay, I'm not going to bring this to pass in your time, but I'm going to bring an end to your dynasty in my time. And that's what this is. That's fulfilling that prediction made because of the Naboth vineyard experience. So Jehu does that. And then the purging of Baal worship. He goes to Samaria and he says, we want to gather. It's kind of like he said, let's have the first annual conference for Baal worshipers. This is the Grisanti paraphrase of that, right? Let's have this massive gathering of Baal worshipers at the temple of Baal in Samaria. And they're coming and everybody's excited. Rewards are going to be handed out. Who's going to get their best attendance star. I'm being facetious here. But there is a massive gathering, and it sounds like that all of the Baal priests and priestesses come to the meeting. And then he says, I'll be right back. Shuts the doors, locks them, and then gets the soldiers gathered, and they say, go in there. Anybody comes out alive, it's your life. And the Baal prophets and prophetesses are killed. And it pretty much puts a dent in the worship of Baal worship in the northern kingdom. So he obeyed God in trying to wipe out Baal worship in the northern kingdom. Unfortunately, Jehu kept worshiping all the other gods. And so he didn't honor the Lord and was going to have a limited dynasty, even though it was the longest of the northern kingdom. That's Jehu. And then the sons, Jehoaz and Jehoash, are not impressive. In the time of their reign, I've told you that I've told you that when Uzziah comes to the throne, Judah is just around Jerusalem, and when Jeroboam the two comes to the throne, it's just the land around Samaria that belongs to the northern kingdom. These two guys are a big part of that shrinking of the northern kingdom. They're ineffective rulers. Syria is growing in power, or Aram, it's called, Aram. And so by the time Jehoash is done, the northern kingdom is just a small, limited region. And that brings us to the thing that's page 57 or so, Jeroboam the second. Is it after the page? Maybe it's 59. It's 4b, Jeroboam the second, an evil king. What page? 59, okay. And I write there, golden age of the divided monarchy, like with Uzziah in the south during Jeroboam the second's reign. The northern kingdom reaches an extent of land that is unparalleled since the time of David and Solomon. So I showed you the map here. It's huge. He's able to, Damascus crunched both the southern and the northern kingdoms to a small area, and Jeroboam II is able to push Syria out of there and take over their territory. And so it's a very impressive time. Now let me make a connection between Jeroboam II and a biblical prophet. The prophet Jonah, it says, that he ministered in the days of Jeroboam II. He was from a town called Gath-Hepher, which is up near Nazareth. And when you think about the prophet Jonah, understanding, connecting him, the prophet Jonah with the time of Jeroboam II helps clarify some of what the message of Jonah is about. Because in the time of Jeroboam II, Israel had come to a place of great affluence, power, influence, cha-ching, cha-ching, money in the pocket, full savings accounts, if you will. They're abundantly taken care of. They were powerful. They were regionally significant. They were impressive. What quite often happens with affluence and power and influence and abundance? What? Corruption, apathy, a lack of concern for others, and a desire to focus on themselves. I think the prophet Jonah is not written, I'm absolutely convinced, not just think, that the prophet Jonah the book is not written for the benefit of the Assyrians, for Ninevites. It's written as an indictment, as a rebuke against the Israelites of Jeroboam II's time, because they were unconcerned with God's agenda. Now, this is a whole other rabbit trail. We can't go down very far. I would contend that in the Old Testament, Israel as a nation is never given a missionary commission to go out to the other nations to share the gospel. Now, it doesn't mean they shouldn't have desired that people know about God, because that was their core function, to be a banner nation, to live in a way that represented God to each other as Israelites as well as to the nations around them. But that was more let me use a couple of snazzy words here, okay? Centrifugal. The merry-go-round, remember, do you have those merry-go-rounds? What do you call them here? Merry-go-rounds? Okay, I didn't know if you had a certain unique name for them. Okay, merry-go-rounds. When as a kid you're on a merry-go-round and they push that thing around and you're holding on for dear life because the scientific phenomenon of centrifugal force is pushing outward, right? Well, the opposite word is centripetal, pulling inward. In the Old Testament, Israel's function as a witness of the nation was more centripetal. It was more as a banner nation as they are in contact with the pagan nations. Besides representing God to each other, it was more centripetal, or a banner nation by people coming to Israel, drawn to the truth. So this isn't a missionary book fundamentally. But the point is, as a nation, they should always be burdened with representing God's character to others. And when Jonah is told to go preach to Nineveh, no good, dirty, rotten Nineveh, that had been the bane of their existence for a long time, had oppressed them in different ways at different times. Jonah wanted nothing to do with it. And when he's forced to go because he's swallowed by the whale and spit up about where he started from and has to travel to Nineveh, and even when God occasions some kind of repentance among the Ninevites, he wants nothing to do with it. I think Jonah is addressing Israelites who are full, abundant, taken care of, but have zero interest in God's agenda, which may be costly, which means getting out of your fortress, which means being a witness in your life to those around you. Now, I would tell you that in the New Testament, I think it's the centripetal word has centrifugal added to it. And that's where you have the addition of this missionary enterprise, the centrifugal force of God's people being flung out to the four corners of the earth as part of his plan. So that becomes part of God's plan as far as his outworking. But I just think that when I think about Jonah, to connect it with the time of Jeroboam II, because it's one of the kings that said he ruled under, and knowing Jeroboam II's impact on the extent and power and influence and affluence of the nation of Israel, it seems to be that Jonah the prophet writes the book as a transformed man, giving us a window into the darkness of his heart that is at a time when he, as well as the nation, were unconcerned about God's agenda and unconcerned about witnessing to, in their lives, those things that were important to God. When you think about Jonah running away from God on the ship to Tarshish, remember what he says in Jonah 4:2, which is a theologically important sentence. This is why I left the first time, because I knew you are a gracious, compassionate God, full of loving kindness, slow to anger, willing to relent and promise punishment. And then the result of that should have been, and that's what I want to be. And that's not where he was before the end of the book of Jonah. I think he writes to us as a transformed man. But again, I just think that's a case where connecting the history of Israel with the biblical prophet helps us better understand what Jonah is trying to get across. And that's, again, something that's very relevant. When you think about, kind of like in America, I know, at least I know from what I've been told, average incomes in the UK are below what they are in America. That isn't a slam. I'm not saying you guys are dumb or bad. That's what I've been told. But I still would say, if you took Americans or residents of the UK and compare them to a lot of the world, we're wealthy. Just even though you're eking by and bills are challenging, and I understand all of that. And what quite often goes with a relative degree of abundance. The message of Jonah, I need in my heart to not just be happy with what I have and uninterested in showing God's character to those who are around me. I need to be burdened to be part of God's agenda. Anyway, I just think that's a good relevance of history, context to understanding a prophet's message. Questions about that? Okay. All right, we're going to jump to section 3 because an important transition is happening. We were going to talk about the Assyrians here for a moment, really the Neo-Assyrians, but the Assyrian Empire became a world power. And you have on this map here, I've given you a look of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. It goes all the way from Palestine, Israel, all the way over up into Asia Minor, all the way over to Mesopotamia, including the territory that was going to be taken up by Babylon and Medo-Persia later on. Here are some main kings of the Assyrian Empire, and I'm not going to pursue them at length, but 1B, Tiglath-Pileser III. When we were having our children, my wife and I, and we'd come to names for the kids, I would always, how about Ashur-Nasir-Paul? How about Ashur-Uballit? That's Sennacherib. How was Sennacherib? Tiglath-Pileser. And when you go in the other room, I'm going to pick these names myself. Of course, I was teasing, but that's always the funny joke about these are the names Dad wanted. Anyway, Tiglath-Pileser. He's an impressive king. He's one of the first major Assyrian kings as it relates to his impact on Israel. He's called the word name Pul in some Old Testament passages, but there are 2 or 3 passages where he's very, very significant. Like in the wake of Isaiah 7, in the context of Isaiah 7, he's the Assyrian that Ahaz hires to come and get these guys off of his back. So Tiglath-Pileser is a major player. Shalmaneser, when we think about the fall of the northern kingdom, remember you have 10 northern tribes, 2 southern tribes, Israel, Judah. 722 BC, from 732 to 722 BC is the very end of the northern kingdom. We'll see that in a moment. Shalmaneser is when the Assyrians come and besiege Samaria at the end of that time, and he dies right before they conquered Samaria. Sargon II took over for him. Sennacherib is the guy that you may think of. He's the one who's known for his siege of Jerusalem. He's the guy who we read about in both 2 Kings and in Isaiah, where he's all ready to crunch Jerusalem, and he writes in his annals that Hezekiah caged like a bird in Jerusalem, and he forgets to mention about the 185,000 soldiers of his that died during the night. And I'm sure they have not, I'm doing, by the way, we're doing a tour of the British Museum tomorrow for some of you who want to do it. At least I was told that. Anybody else hear that? Okay. And now I don't know how many of you want to do that. This is going to be a fun one for me. I'm going to give a tour of the museum, and I've never been there. But I've been to lots of museums, and I've seen all those things. I've been to the Israel Museum with a lot of the facsimiles there, and so I'm excited about it. And I think I'll be able to explain all that I need to explain. But I believe they have at least a facsimile of, if not the real one there, that gives us information. It's called, it's called Sennacherib's Prism, Taylor's Prism, where they have this information recorded. Sennacherib is the guy who, before that surrounding of Jerusalem and then the 105,000 soldiers dying, he defeated the city of Lachish in the southwestern part of Israel. And again, I'm really pumped about this. I've never been to the British Museum before, in the Lachish room that has all of that relief that Sennacherib wrote to kind of, look at me, look what I've done. Of course, he doesn't tell them about the 185,000 soldiers who died, but we'll see that tomorrow as well. Okay, those are just quickly some of the major Assyrian kings that have an impact on Israel. I want to just kind of wrap up to the end of the northern kingdom here, and then we'll move forward. So I'm on page around 60, I think. It's 2a, Judah, Jotham, and Ahaz. Remember, the last guy we talked about was Uzziah, the guy who began well, became proud and arrogant, and ended badly. His son Jotham has to co-reign with him for a number of years. Jotham was a generally good king, but we aren't. We don't see a lot told us about him. His son Ahaz, though, was an evil king, and when we talked about prescriptive, descriptive, and I say this not proudly because having made some of these mistakes personally, I remember years and years ago when I would teach history of Israel, and I'd take a Jotham who's a good king, and he has a son named Ahaz who's an evil king. I would, he must have been a bad father, and it's like, whoa. The text doesn't make that development, right? So I'm not going to go where the text doesn't take me. It's a description of, he was this king, next guy, he was this king. If I'm not given information to tell me about his parenting qualities, I'm not going down that road. I'm not going to make a major thing out of nothing, out of the white space, the blank stuff, with no words written on them. I'm going to focus on what the text plays with. And we just have to be careful we don't preach from the white space, just focus on what's said. And if the text doesn't make a play, if the text doesn't make an affirmation to clarify or to make a point, let's not create them on our own. Anyway, Ahaz whose dad is described as a good king, Jotham, is an evil king. In fact, a horribly wicked king. He had these military conflicts. The Syro-Ephraimite War is what he's involved in, but what I want you to think about with Ahaz is, I'm going to read 2 Kings 16:3. It says here that he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He's a king of Judah. To walk in the ways of the kings of Israel is like saying he walked like King Jeroboam. Is that good? No, because the Israel we're talking about here is the northern kingdom. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He even made his sons pass through the fire, imitating the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had dispossessed before the Israelites. Making them pass through the fire isn't like putting a big old bed of charcoal and saying, okay, kid, run across these hot charcoals. No, it's child sacrifice. In the Hinnom Valley, we've talked about Jerusalem before, but if you think about the city of Jerusalem, I have a map here we can look at. We'll come to this again. From the time of Hezekiah, okay, here's the Kidron Valley. Here's the Central Valley. This is what was the Jerusalem when David took it. Temple. This is the Western Hill. This is the Eastern Hill. This is the Hinnom Valley. Hinnom Valley. Well, over here someplace, on the other side of this wall, was the Hinnom Valley, where Ahaz and other kings set up the image of the god Molech, Chemosh. Two kind of similar gods. And what the image of the god Molech was a bull, a big bull sitting on its haunches, like sitting on its bottom, and its belly is a big furnace. And the worship of the god Molech would involve walking up with your little child, having them opening the door and tossing him in as a sacrifice to the god. That's what this is referring to. When it says that Ahaz made his son pass through the fire, it's this description of child sacrifice. Horribly sad. It says then he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree. And this is a place where high places is bad. He's involved in widespread pagan worship. So Ahaz is a horribly wicked king. Now during his time, and I can't develop this as much as I'd like, and you've heard that 100 times already, I realize. I feel pained by that. But during his reign, they had what's called the Syro-Ephraimite War. Okay, so remember we talked about Assyria. Okay, we'll look at this for a moment. Now, I'm not going to deal with everything on the map, but I want you to see some major players. Up here in Damascus. And the king of Damascus at that time is a guy named Rezin, R-E-Z-I-N. Over here is Samaria. The king there is Pekah. And by the way, if you want these names, go to Isaiah 7, 1-9. It's a scenario where Ahaz, and then you have Jerusalem here. Jerusalem's right here. That's Ahaz. That's where he rules. So we have Rezin up in Damascus, Pekah in Samaria, Ahaz in Jerusalem. Judah, Israel, Syria. Aram, A-R-A-M. Ephraim, it's called as well as Israel and Judah. Okay, now here's the short version. What's happening here in the Syro-Ephraimite War, Syro, Syria, Ephraim, Israel. Are you with me here? So Syria, Ephraim against Judah. Well, why in the world are they doing that? Well, we're talking in the time of Ahaz, we're talking about 735 to 715 BC. This is around the time when the Assyrians are really starting to grow in power. And they're trying to increase their influence in this part of the world. So Syria, Aram, and Israel, Ephraim, and some other smaller countries decide to ally together against Assyria. They want to keep Assyria from growing in their influence in the area. So they have this alliance against Assyria, and they want Ahaz to join. And he refuses to join their alliance. Why in the world? Who knows? And so they fight him. And they have a guy named the son of Tabeel they have in mind to replace Ahaz with. And so the Syro-Ephraimite war has three kind of campaigns. It's only the first two don't go well for Ahaz. In the first two campaigns, the Syro-Ephraimite coalition is doing well and putting a dent in Ahaz. Even it's between the second and the third attack that Isaiah 7 belongs. So they've attacked Ahaz. First time they went home, re-equipped. Second time they attacked and crunched him big time and stayed, camped right north of Jerusalem. And Ahaz is terrified. You read Isaiah 7 sometime. He's terrified. Isaiah meets him in the fuller's field just south of the city of Jerusalem. And Ahaz is afraid because these guys, the focus, the bullseye is right on Ahaz's chest. Because they have a guy in the wings to replace him with. Now, if it was just Ahaz, who was a spiritual loser, it didn't have a concern for Yahweh, who cares? But it's not just about Ahaz, is it? What was true of all of the kings of the southern kingdom? Ethnicity, lineage, what? They were Davidic. They're in the line of David. Well, what's another way of saying that? The Messianic line. So what we're talking about by replacing Ahaz with the son of Tabeel is a wiping out of the Messianic line, bringing it to an end. And so what happens in Isaiah 7 is addressing a threat to the Messianic line. So the Syro-Ephraimite war, after the second attack, not only did, like it says, Pekah slew 120,000 men of Judah in one day, captured 200,000 others, released them immediately, but it didn't go well for Ahaz, and they stayed camped just north of Jerusalem. It doesn't look like it's going to end well. And it's in that context of Isaiah 7 where you have the Lord, through Isaiah, is telling him that these guys aren't going to win. They're not going to even be nations here in about 30 years. And there's more things to say there, but that's a Pandora's box that I'm not going to open. Okay, I need to get done with these notes, but I will just tell you that the information in Isaiah 7, 1-9 is anchored right here in the Syro-Ephraimite war, where you have Syria and Ephraim coming against Jerusalem, intending to remove Ahaz and put in the son of Tabeel, bringing an end to the Messianic line, and the Lord says, not going to happen. And providentially, what does he do? He eventually brings an end to both of those kingdoms. The Assyrian king comes and he wipes out Damascus. Done. They're done as a nation. And he comes to Samaria and just reduces them to a small circle of land around the city of Samaria. This ends in 732, and that's when Shalmaneser the fifth comes and reduces Samaria, Israel, to a small precinct of land around the city of Samaria. Anyway, so God makes that not happen. There's other things to talk about there, but that's just a connection of this historical war, if you will. It provides the backdrop for Isaiah 7. Okay. You see, one of the things that's going on in Isaiah 7 as well is, remember, the Lord said, this will not happen, it will not take place. And then he, through the prophet, says to Ahaz, ask for a sign. Whatever you want. Carte blanche. Oh, no. I couldn't test the Lord. and ask him for a sign. Baloney. That wasn't the issue. You know what Ahaz was doing about the same time, if not right after this? He sent, a truckload isn't the right expression, but wagon loads. He sent tribute to the Assyrian king to buy him off, to come and attack these two guys to get him off his back. He wouldn't believe that God would orchestrate it, so he paid that Assyrian king. Well, the Assyrian king did it, but he was carrying out God's intentions because God promised to protect them, and Ahaz paid them, but God was going to bring it to pass anyway. And as a matter of fact, the Assyrian king came down to Ahaz and crunched him as well. So, just as God is the one who orchestrates that deliverance, and Ahaz is being very pious, but being hypocritical in his refusal to ask for a sign. Okay, that's Ahaz. Okay, we've taken our biblical camcorder and looked at northern kingdom, then southern kingdom, and now let's just hit the end of the northern kingdom, 3a, probably around page 60, 61, 3a, the last days of Israel. Are you there? Okay. Now, look at those black boxes. This is chaos and hysteria time. In that short period of time, from about 740 to about 722, you have 4 dynasty changes. And that's always carnage. That's always bloodshed. Because each family is going to wipe out the previous family. So you have these, Shalom lasts one reign. Then Menahem and Pekahiah 2 in that dynasty. Pekah 1 king. Then Hoshea, and then it's over. So I give these kings listed here. Shalom was assassinated. Shalom assassinated the last guy of the Jehu dynasty. Then a month later, he's assassinated. Menahem rules for a little longer time, and he's killed. Anyway, so you have just chaos and hysteria. Pekah, 4b, dynasty number 7. He's the one in the Syro-Ephraimite war. It was Rezin of Syria, Pekah of Israel, that were allied against Ahaz. They were trying to keep Assyria out, which is understandable. Ahaz, not because he was a pious, believing man. For some reason, we don't know why, he refused to join the coalition, and Pekah was one of those kings, Pekah of Israel, Rezin of Syria, who, Pekah of Israel, here in Samaria, Rezin of Damascus are the 2 major players in that Syro-Ephraimite war. And it's in the wake of Tiglath-Pileser coming to Israel to attack them. Pekah is put to death. And Hoshea, another king, is put on the throne, who is the last king of the northern kingdom. He's really like a governor because Israel is so small, and he lasts for about 10 years, and eventually he revolts against Assyria and listens to Egypt. They'll come and help him, and he's taken prisoner. They besiege the city. After a 2-year siege, we have Samaria falls, and Israel is over as a nation. To see the deportation of people. The Assyrians pioneered this, and this is not a happy thought. The Assyrians pioneered this idea of deportation, importation. What they would do, and they did this in all their conquered peoples, they would, like in this case when they conquered Israel finally, they took thousands, tens of thousands of northern kingdom inhabitants and then spread them like seed throughout the Assyrian Empire in different areas. And they imported thousands of people from other conquered areas and spread them like seed throughout the northern kingdom. Why would they do that? Well, a little bit of punishment was part of it. But by mixing it all up, they kind of destroy that esprit de corps, the spirit of independence, that idea of nationalism that might create later rebellions. That was their idea. And it was part of their barbaric cruelty. And so that's what's happening here. And what are the implications for the next major period after this when you have exile and then the post-exilic period? What's true ethnically about the Israelites who are living in that area? Yeah. So they become like they were, but bigger syncretists. They're worshiping other gods, and you have what is it? Samaritans. Now remember, this area, another name, this city is Samaria. This area becomes called the area of Samaritans. They're the half-breeds. They're the Israelite who knows what mix. Because various peoples from conquered parts of the Assyrian Empire are imported in and scattered around, intermarriage involving religious syncretism, probably Yahweh plus other gods, and ethnic impurity. And so you have Samaritans who are not all Israelite. So that's going to show up later on. Now, the biggest problem wasn't the ethnic issue, really, biblically. The biggest problem was the syncretism that was even more deeply entrenched in these people. I mean, I think the primary reason that should have been behind why Zerubbabel and Shealtiel and Ezra and then Nehemiah don't want their help is because they aren't Yahweh worshipers. If you're worshiping Yahweh plus other gods, guess what? You're not a Yahweh worshiper. It's like if I had my wife and I slept with 5 other women, am I a one-woman man? No, I'm not. Right? That's what the point is. They aren't Yahweh worshipers. They're hodgepodge worshipers. They're a collection of God worshipers. And that would have been the fundamental reason biblically why Zerubbabel, Shealtiel, Ezra, and then Nehemiah wouldn't have them participate in rebuilding the temple, building the walls of Jerusalem, because there'll be a corrupting influence on his people. This is a Grisanti take here, I would affirm, but I think it's biblical. The attitudes toward the ethnic issue, whether it be Gentiles or the mixed breed, the Samaritans, I would suggest is not a biblical value. I think it becomes a core part of a Jew's attitude that the Samaritans and the Gentiles are lower, bad, garbage people. We are the ones. We are the ones God loves. We are the ones that have value. They have no value. You see it in the New Testament. The animosity of the Jews toward Gentiles, the animosity of the Jews toward the Samaritans. What I'm saying is that is not an Old Testament law mandated attitude. I think it's a corrupt thing. I think it's part of the worldview of the Jews, and I understand part of it. If you have the Gentiles who have been the ones who have been crunching you for all these years as pagan nations, would you love them? If I was Jonah, would I have loved the thought of going to preach to the Assyrians and seeing them receive mercy and grace? Well, sinfully speaking, no. What I just want to make sure we understand is this attitude with ethnicity at its core, hating Samaritans, hating the Gentiles, is not the result of Old Testament teaching. When God says that Israel is his firstborn, it isn't what they call xenophobia, a hatred of or a fear of Gentiles. That's not what it's equal to. It's that God has seen fit to choose Israel as his firstborn as part of his plan for the world. God is always interested in resolving the sin problem that will affect the world. He intends to establish a kingdom over the world. He has them in mind. And so I just want to make sure we realize that there are times we see a bad version of God's focus on Israel that isn't a biblical value? Questions? Concerns? I mean, even the massive wall that was built between the Gentiles and the Jews in the New Testament is not all part of a biblical value. I just think it's part of the bad version of the reality of God putting his people in a place of special blessing. God didn't hate the Gentiles. There were other things that are part of this discussion, but sometimes we see that as what the Mosaic Law was teaching. And this is a little another rabbit trail, just as when I think about Judaism, I keep that word distinct from Old Testament religion, if you will. What the Mosaic Law taught is not equal to Judaism. That's a longer discussion, but I'll just tell you that Judaism, modern Judaism, I wouldn't use that term to describe what the Mosaic Law is teaching. Modern Judaism is an externally focused, tradition-based understanding of the Old Testament. You're the Talmud. Again, I'm going down a road I can't go down very far. I would just say that's another misunderstanding where people see Judaism and think, well, that's what the Old Testament law was talking about. No. That's a hijacking of the Mosaic Law. Anyway, so I want to move on here. Before I go on, any questions? Great confusion I caused? Anybody understand what I'm saying? Okay. All right, it's about an hour. Since we started, I'll come back. It's almost 3:10, 3:20.